Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts, and with me, as always, if always for you means the last 8 to 10 episodes, it's been always, is my co-host and producer, Dan Portnoy. Hi, Dan.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Dan and I are walking through the book Sacred Strides, talking about the stuff that's in the book and the stuff that's behind the book, sort of the layers underneath the layers. Dan is a longtime friend. We've also been business partners for, it's been more than 2 decades. And Dan has a unique perspective on the work that I do. And so I'm enjoying going back through these chapters with someone who knows my work, cares about what I do, and thinks I'm a decent writer. So that's helpful. That's good. You know what? I don't want to fan up in this space. Be like, yeah, this is
You're
the
the
best
best.
chapter. You're the best.
Well, I think were you there when I asked Jennifer Knapp out? Were you there? Was that you?
No, but
I'd like to say that's the first and last time I asked out a woman of the LGBTQ, but it's not. It wasn't. It was not the last.
Well, sounds like you got a type there, Dan.
I mean, I did get married late. Maybe I did. I don't know.
That was part of your path.
Yeah, I guess.
Yep. You know, they say you got to hit some walls, hit some limits, and that would be a limitation. Is if you're asking out gay women.
Yeah.
That's gonna. You know,
It doesn't matter how good your ask is.
It doesn't. It really.
You can have a really good ask.
Listen, you're really charming. But
still no.
That's great.
I'm just still not feeling it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan. All right. Anyway.
So we're on chapter 8 of this book, and you said just before the recording you actually like this chapter as opposed to several others. You think this chapter is pretty funny.
I do. I actually think that this is the kind of thing that has happened in probably all of our lives in some sort of way, that there's kind of like a millstone, and you're just dragging it, and it takes too long for you to figure out what this is. And literally, this is a funny story. So can you give us the back? What's going on in this chapter? Because it's so good.
This is when I do the presentation that eventually became the book. This is the story that sort of the front end of it. So some folks who have heard me talk about the book, if you're someone who listens to the podcast and you followed me and you were around for the first part of the book launch and I was on podcast, this is a story I've told a few times. And it was really the beginning of the conscious part of my Sabbath keeping and rest practice. I've been self-employed since 1998. And that's been a great journey. And part of that journey, though, comes with not knowing quite exactly where my money is going to come from all the time, especially looking outward. So I was just working a truckload, and I was tired. And this is what Dan's just pointing out. Like I wasn't just tired. I was actually wearing myself out, and I didn't know the difference, because it's one thing to be tired. It's a different thing entirely to be worn out. And I wonder if there's actually kind of a necessity to hitting this kind of wall so that we might know the difference. I've talked about this a bunch in this podcast series. Like, there are ways in which we really only come to certain knowledge by what we would call failure. These are just formational moments. I was not just tired, I was actually worn out. And I think I had to get to a point of burnout and being worn out before I realized before I had the data, so I could actually make a distinguishing mark between the two things. So my wife read this excerpt from a book by a guy named Mark Buchanan. It's called The Rest of God, Restoring Your Soul by Restoring the Sabbath. And I think it was in Christianity Today. I think it was the excerpt. She came in the office and she said this garage office, and she's like, "Hey, you should check this excerpt out." And I literally said, "I don't have time. I don't have time to read an excerpt from a book that doesn't contribute to my work life, because I'm reading all the time so that I can make stuff." I don't really have time for this. Can you summarize that? She's like, do you need me to summarize the excerpt of a book? I'm like, that's where we're at right now. So she kind of does. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really interested. She's like, well, I'm gonna order the book. So she orders the book. She reads the book, comes back a few weeks later. She's like, this is I think speaking to you. Um, you know, you should read the book. I'm like, what's the book about? She's like, it's the book, the excerpt. I'm like, like, can you summarize it? She's like, can I summarize it? I tried to read an excerpt to you before. So, anyways, she says, this is what we're gonna do. 7 weeks out, we're gonna plan, just a rest day and practice this thing. And I just say yes, and I don't say yes because I am in agreement philosophically. I just don't want to fight about it anymore. So I just this
Wait,
is
did you say 7 weeks out?
7 weeks out. She pointed at like
7 weeks out.
there
Take
was
a
a
day
there was
off.
there was a
7 weeks out.
there was a free day 7 weeks out.
Okay.
And it was the first one. And 7 weeks out, we're gonna rest. Okay, great, cool. And this is like husbandry stuff. I didn't say yes because I agreed. I said yes because I wanted to just end the fight, and I chose to lose a battle so I could move on. So moved on. The following week, I get an email from my buddy in Kansas City. He's like, "Are you available this weekend?" And it's the weekend 7 weeks out. I'm like, "Yes, I got nothing going on." I tell Amy, I'm like, "Hey, I can't do the thing, the whole rest thing because I got a job." She's like, "What's it?" And I said, "I don't really know. I'm just going to Kansas City." So when I talked to Dan, who was the pastor of this church way back then, I'm like, "Hey, what's the thing? How can I prep and be ready for the weekend?" He's like, "Yeah, the staff and I just read this book by Mark Buchanan. It's called The Rest of God: Restoring Your Soul by Restoring the Sabbath." He's like, "Do you know it?" I'm like, "A little bit, kind of ish." He's like, "Yeah, I'll send you a copy." So he sent me a copy, and
Is that like knowing adjacent? I was knowing
I'm
adjacent.
knowledge adjacent to this book. I have a peripheral knowledge of the book. So he sends me the book, and I totally don't read it. I read the back of the book. I finally read the excerpt in Christianity Today, and like a little bit of the last chapter. I read just enough of the book so that I can like get what I need to do the job, which is actually reflective of like how so much of my spiritual life was working at the time. Is like I just need a little juice because I got all the stuff I'm doing. If you can give me a little bit so I can keep going. Everything was predicated on my work life. Got to Kansas City, do the weekend, and Dan says, "Dude, you're tired." And this is what the conversation from the beginning. I had known him for a decade at that point, at least, and so he knew the difference between like, yeah, I mean, there's tired, and then there was like something else. And I was like, yeah, man, that's just part of being an adult. And he's like, no, dude, there's something up with you. Like, why don't you stay? Why don't you stay a couple days? Okay, cool. I will. That sounds great. What if I will. We'll eat your airline ticket. You just stay and get some rest. Okay, cool. An hour or so after that, I get a text on my phone from my buddy Kurt, who lives in Nashville, and he's like, "Are you available this week?" I said, "Sure." He's like, "Can you be here tomorrow?" Which is the day that Dan's asking me to stay and rest. I'm like, "Yes, I got nothing going on." So I say to Dan, so I say to Dan, who's in Kansas City, I'm like, "Hey man, I'm really sorry. Like, I appreciate the gift, but like, I got a job and I've got to work to hold my life together." He's like, "Man, that's really disappointing." I said, "Yeah, I can imagine it is." And yet, so I get to the airport and I still don't know what the job is. Like, I don't know anything. I text Kirk. I'm like on, getting ready to get on the plane. I'm like, "Hey, so what? Just so I can prep songs or whatever." Like, he's like, "Yeah, you're song leading for this retreat." I said, "Cool." It's like, is there a theme?" He said, "Yeah. So, we hired a song leader, but they're in Nashville, and we kind of want to just provide, music, but not hire someone we're trying to do the retreat for because this is a retreat for artists in Nashville." I said, "Great. What's the theme?" He's like, "Yeah." He said, "We're flying this author, and his name is Mark Buchanan. He wrote this book called The Rest of God: Restoring Your Soul by Restoring the Sabbath." And he's like, "Do you know it?" I was like, "A little bit. I'm adjacently." So I'm approaching the book. I get to this is where like you would figure the story ends there, but I walk into the room and uh, I think I'm going to be leading songs, and there's a guy named Matthew Perryman Jones who's a phenomenal singer songwriter,
Yes.
and he's standing in the corner with like song sheets out. It's Matthew Perryman Jones and another song, uh, incredible songstress named Katie Herzig. And
Yes.
I was like, "Hey, what's up?" Like, "What are you guys doing here?" They're like, "What are you doing here?" I was like, "I thought I was filling in for you." I'm like, "No, you." I don't know where you heard that. Like we never told anyone we weren't coming. So there I am, stuck in at a retreat, led by the guy whose book has been chasing me around like a rabid hound for like 6 months. And the first thing he says is, if you're in this room, I'm going to assume that you love what you're doing. If you want to love what you're doing and do what you love long term, you have to learn to not do it. And that was the beginning of this journey for me. Um, and it did start off with a fair amount of humorous, what do I call it? Humorous resistance to deeper truths in my life. That's how this chapter kicks off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you probably should have got a restraining order against the book
Against
because
the
at this
book,
point
actually,
it's stalking.
woulda, coulda,
Stalking.
woulda, coulda, shoulda took legal action.
Yeah, I mean, goodness. Um, yeah, so this is so you kind of get shoehorned or suckered into actually figuring this thing out,
Yeah,
which is hilarious because and also maybe appropriate. Like
I think so.
that's just kind of the thing. And I can't imagine going through this being married. Because the mirror that our spouses hold up to us
Yes.
are just terrible
Well,
sometimes, and
no,
it
whether it's
sounds like
marriage or
that
if
was
you well, it wasn't just marriage. It was like like these friends too, who are like anyone who knows you at all. Like
mhm,
it's like anyone who knows and loves you. This is why religion is practiced in community, is because which is no religion specific in this context, but this is why a good life is practiced in relationship to other people, is because there are things happening in you that loving people will see that you won't. And it took, for me, multiple people that I cared about pointing stuff out before I even started to entertain the idea that there was a difference between the kind of tired I was and the kind of burnout I was up against. Other people saw it. I didn't know. I was literally the frog in the boiling water. And someone else is
yes.
like, hey, bro, your skin is boiling. No way. Like, it's not just, it's warm in here. No, you're dying. I don't think I am. No, you are. Like, it took other people to point it out because they could see it from the outside. But it took, yeah, and it took several people.
But how how other than finding out where the frog in the boiling water do we do this?
I don't really know. To be honest, I don't, because of how deep this crisis runs for folks like me culturally. I don't know if there's I don't know if there's a doorway into this practice, into this like embodied practical knowledge that doesn't include or involve like experiencing it in some way, shape, or form. There's sort of a there is a, and this is Christian in a lot of ways. There's something to the nature of suffering that has a a really positive effect. In other words, like no one wants to hurt. You don't really want to hurt. But I don't really fundamentally believe that stove is as hot as my parents say it was until I put my hand on it. There's actually
Mhm.
something to that. And like as silly as that sounds, like you should believe the ones who came before you. Yeah, I think that's probably true. But there are things in life, including and specifically when it comes to like identity things and my own health and the value of my own life, there are things I have to believe on a deeper level than like someone else told me. And I think we have to hit certain walls. I think we have to experience some degree of pain. I think we have to experience, in this context, some degree of burnout before we actually begin to entertain, like, this is tired. This is not okay. I'm okay being
Mhm.
tired. I'm not okay being over here. I think I have to feel that before I actually
Mhm.
believe it. I can't just be
Yeah.
taught it. It's got to be embodied. So I think that ends up being the doorway, which is like the dark part of the good news is you're going to get hurt and you're going to hurt yourself, and there is hope on the other side of it.
Yeah. No, but the part of the thing that leads up to it is that I know too many people that do. I mean, you're normal at the time. Let's even say a year before this crisis goes down. Your new normal or your normal was super different than the average Joe normal.
It's probably true.
Very, very different.
Yeah.
The way that your days were set up, the way that your whole life was set up was super different. So of course, if it would, you got used to feeling alone
Yes.
in that thing.
That's a good point. I did. You're 100% right. It was like I wasn't because that self-employment meant I was on my own and doing my own evaluations. That's actually great. It's just something I didn't write in the book. It's one of the elements of the thing that made it different for me. And it's also part of, now that you say that, it's part of why I probably didn't believe other people. Is because I
Totally.
was having an experience that I knew I was having, and I was the one evaluating my thumbs up and my thumb, like I was the one planning the jobs, I was the one doing the jobs, I was the one evaluating the jobs, I was the one responsible for the jobs. Like it was me, and then it was me. And because I was having the conversation about effectiveness and what was good and bad by myself, I didn't, and this is actually a little bit deeper, I didn't really trust other people to be able to evaluate my life. Like why would you know? You don't
Yeah,
know,
they wouldn't
you
know.
don't know what
Yeah.
you don't know what it's like, and you get this, like other people like ask questions, not even ask questions, other people have like critiques about like what I'm doing or what, an entrepreneur, an artist, or solo actor is doing, and it's like I'll answer some questions for you, but there's not a chance in the world you have any idea what it takes to do what I'm doing, so I'm not going to trust your critique. There's something of
Right. And
that
then
that was also true.
and there's a lot of hard lessons on that road, especially in the beginning, because you start doing the like, oh, I'm just like everybody else, and then it's like, no, 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 no. And actually that's really hard. I thought that that was very difficult to be like, oh, I'm really on my own on this.
Yeah, and
I speak a different language.
and that's, I think that that was experientially true of me. I think that ends up being true of a lot of us. I think that ends up being true of a lot of folks. Is like my career and the way my career was working at the time really did like kind of lend itself to the narrative that I am on my own and no one gets it. I do think though that a lot, maybe I want to say this. Most of us experience some some degree of that I'm not actually understood. That what's happening in my life is unlike what's happening in your life. And so you might have some thoughts, and that's cute and nice, but you don't really get me. I think there's some I think there is something to that. There's kind of like a it's a really destructive arrogance that like
Yeah.
I'm
Oh yeah.
experienced, and I think a lot of us experience it. Like I'm experiencing my life in a way in which you could not possibly understand. Um, Again, only on the other side of burnout or getting hurt or some degree of failure or suffering do we come through the doorway and like see all these people that have been like talking to us. We're like, oh, I am actually just like all of you. Like I'm not so unique. I'm unique in my talents and skills and all this kind of stuff I can get in my head. But on the other side of suffering, I feel like everyone else. We all feel the same thing on the other side of suffering. And so it's one of the gifts of like actually hitting a wall is I get to look up and be like, oh, I actually am as limited. I am limited in the same way everyone else is. And I do have
Mhm.
edges and I should have been paying attention.
And I think you put it really, really great here. Being tired all the time isn't a sign of professionalism any more than being injured is a sign of athletic prowess. For someone calling themselves a professional, exhaustion is a sign that something needs to change.
Yes.
And it's funny because I wouldn't think of like, oh yeah, like most NFL players are playing hurt or playing injured or playing bruised.
Yes.
There's that story. Jerome Bettis didn't even get out of bed until Wednesday.
Yeah.
Like he would just not be on his feet at all
Yep.
for 3 days, and just I can't even imagine
No.
the amount of pain the guy's putting himself through every season.
Yeah, and there's something to like there's the nature of his job, right? The nature of Jerome. If y'all don't know Jerome Bettis, by the way, Jerome Bettis was one of the most interesting running backs in NFL history. He was this massive human, total bruiser. He averaged, I think,
Total
like
bruiser.
like just shy of 4 yards a carry, but all four of those yards he like would have because he wasn't fast. He was just really
Nope.
strong, and so
Yeah.
he would hit the hole, and then he'd have like linebackers and linemen on his back, and he was a beat up dude. The nature of his job was that he was physically accosted on the regular. So I get that being, which ends up being true emotionally of folks like artists and pastors, is the nature of your job is that you are emotionally accosted on the regular.
On the reg. Yeah.
Um, but the distinguisher when I say being tired all the time isn't a sign of professionalism. It is a side effect of the job, but it is not a qualification. It's not like, well, being a professional means I'm going to hurt, or being a professional means I'm going to suffer. It is a it's a side effect of in the Christian tradition we would say it's a side effect of sin. That like it is one of the effects of sin on human existence is suffering and pain and exhaustion. Um, I was wearing it like a badge of honor. That like if I'm tired, that means I've leveled up. If I'm tired all the time, now I've really leveled up. As opposed to paying attention to my body, paying attention to my psychology. That if I'm being worn out, professionalism is actually this kind of divine or divinely orchestrated commitment to the work I'm doing. I'm going to be here and I'm going to be committed. And it actually requires or begs of me that I would become a better and more whole person. That's actual professionalism. I was actually thinking like being a professional just means like I do the work and I get paid for it. And then whatever comes with that, comes with that, which included suffering and pain and exhaustion. Being a professional actually just means I have a long-term commitment to this thing and this is part of who I am. A I'm professing something deep and true of myself and of the world as I do this. That's being a professional. It begs the question, am I healthy enough to do this? And that was the part I wasn't paying attention to.
Yeah, it's like you could get emotionally abused as a pastor. Being emotionally abused every day is not okay.
No, it's not okay.
That's
And again, learning the difference between those things, between like it's hard to be a pastor.
sure.
Pastor to church for, or help pastor church for going on 20 years, close to 20 years. I mean, it's a hard job. I was talking to some pastors this past weekend, this past week in Nevada about like how much harder it is now than it used to be, and it might be one of the hardest jobs to do well in America is to actually
Mm,
like wisely and faithfully pastor a church. It's really hard. Does that mean though that doing it well means you have to be hurt? Well, it means like being hurt is like a measurement of success. Yeah, that's a thing we learn in the midst. Like, no, you're gonna get hurt, and it's a thin line. You're gonna get hurt. It's gonna be hard. That's one thing. That being hurt and it being hard is a qualification or some sort of like qualifier that it means you're doing a good job. Like that's a different
hmm.
that's a different metric, and we only
Right.
learn that line by actually getting there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too many pastors also sacrifice their families on the idea that like this is what I'm supposed to do, and it's like no, 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 don't. Nobody wants that. Nobody.
Yes.
Nobody
Yep.
wants that. Nobody wants
Yep.
that. So the thing that I love that you put you we've talked about it just a little bit in talking about um, re- resistance, and you've even used it like resistance is like this verb that's coming to get you,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is an interesting thing. Like it doesn't mean if you've created something good, resistance is coming to get you.
Yes.
Resistance is coming to take that
Yep.
right away from you. And I can't think of the phrase you used about that, like aggressive resistance or something. You put it
Oh,
like that.
you mean from the book?
Um, no, just I think it was we were having a conversation maybe last week. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um, but you just said it that way, and it's really funny because I tend to think of resistance as an abyss, not as an active character.
Yeah, man, it's an active character.
Um, yeah, so that's just that's really funny.
Well, this is
That's
where
really
like
funny.
I part ways with some folks with regards to how the world works, and one of the million reasons I'm thankful for Pressfield's War of Art is because the way Pressfield characterizes resistance is like he personifies this. Resistance
Hmm.
is an agency and has agency, and there's a personality to it, and there's will in it, and it's not just there and you get to just kind of move around it. No, it actually wants things from you. That's actually been my whether you're someone who like buys the whole notion of like darker forces, the demonic or whatever. I don't actually care. I don't care what you name it. But the way he sets it up in the very beginning of the book, he says like if you set out to do things that are not good for you, your calendar is going to open up and you're going to have all kinds of wonderful time to do all of the things that aren't great for you. It's just going to be really easy. But the moment you decide to do anything that actually adds value to your life or helps you get healthy or helps you create anything in the world that's of value, resistance will show up. And the fact that it works that way screams to me of some sort of consciousness. Like there's some, it's not just there and you get to kind of dodge it. If you decide to do positive good things in the world for you or for other people, there are darker forces in the world that will show up sometimes as angels of light and will try their damnedest, quite literally, to keep you from doing things that you should be doing in your life. I am 100% sold out on that notion. It's been my experience for 20 years and I watch it with folks all the time. It's not just out there, it shows up at certain times.
Mhm. Yeah, and so you had no problem just overloading your schedule. That was very easy.
Yep.
But even 7 weeks out, like, this is the great 7 weeks out,
Yep.
your spouse has said, "Hey, let's take that day off in 2 months from now," and you were
Yep.
like, "Yeah, sounds good. No, I can't do that." I just
Well,
think
and that's
that's,
how
like, how
and I
fast
don't
that is.
yeah, and I don't and I won't disparage my relationship with Heartland in Kansas City because like that's a good relationship.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Um and this is part of how I guess we're going to talk about this in this context. It's part of how darkness actually works. Is darkness rarely shows up and says, "Hey, it's Tuesday, heroin." Like that's not how that
Yeah.
like it doesn't be like, here's
You
what I'm
mean
thinking.
like the cross on the switchblade?
Yeah,
You mean
like
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 that? When you're walking down the
oftentimes
street, "Hey, kid."
it's oftentimes it is like it is the difference between that which is good and that which is best. If I'm going to take you the
Mm,
wrong way in your life, I'm going to hand you something that's good, knowing
pretty
that
good.
there's something, if you sacrifice this good, there is a best. And
Mhm.
or at least there's a better. Best is sometimes a little
Yeah.
tricky for folks who don't like to speak in absolutes because I happen to be a Sith, so I do function in absolutes. But the difference between that which is good versus that which is best, that's how resistance actually works. Like it's not going to show up and say, well, if resistance doesn't show up and say, listen, you have this, you know, this week and you're planning exercise and you're planning this and that and the other. I'm thinking like cocaine on Tuesdays. I'm thinking like I think you just drive your car into a wall on Wednesday. Like that's never the plan. The plan is always, the scheme is always like there's this other good I'm going to offer you, and it's going to distract you from like the things that are actually better. I like the word best, the things that are actually better. What was better in this context, in this story, was me healthy. What was good for me in this context was me productive. Is it good for me to be productive? Hell yes, it's good for me to be. I only live so long, and I would like to leave a legacy for my kids, and I'd like to be as deep a blessing as I possibly can be for the people around me. That's a beautiful story. That also makes that a really wonderful tool by which to like lead me away from the deeper truth, the better, maybe the best truth, which is that in all the things I do, I'm the gift I'm offering. And if I'm not a cleaner, clearer, deeper, and like more fully realized version of myself, I'm not giving the best gifts. So that's how resistance ends up working. That's why I get to it in this. That you know the way Pressfield writes it, uh, in in his book is that the professional arms himself against resistance, knowing it's going to show up. Like he knows, the professional knows I'm committed to this thing. Other things are going to come along and steal me from myself. And then years later, and the other reference point in this chapter, the other book reference point is a book called The Active Life. And Parker Palmer writes that the professional originally had a very different meaning. At root, a professional was one who makes a profession of faith, a faith in something larger and wiser than his or her own powers. The true professional is a person whose action points beyond his or herself to the underlying reality, the hidden wholeness on which we can all rely. So I had misidentified professionalism with that first narrative that it's about productivity, that's what's good. Professional is like I stay committed to my productivity and everything else gets sacrificed on that altar. Whereas like the deeper root of the word professional is like I'm actually committed to something deeper than the work I'm doing. That's not the most valuable thing. I'm the most valuable thing in this scenario, and that's the thing I need to be committed to is me, my health, and my wholeness.
Yeah, because how you're doing the thing, how you are while doing the thing is very important.
It is the thing.
It is the thing.
How I do what I do and
Mhm.
who I am as I do it is the thing. Like that is the art. The art is
Oh,
not the
so
artifact.
I'm not supposed to like just like yell at my family the whole time while I'm being an artist.
Yes.
That's not.
That's the story. The very first book I did was this the MCYM book, the CMYK book, and I tell that story about like ripping uh this kid to shreds. He was like part of the he was part of the team that was doing the printing and the pressing for the CMYK book, and like I kept making mistakes. I didn't know I was making. I kept making mistakes, and the project kept getting pushed back. And so I called the warehouse
Oh gosh, I remember this. Oh
and
my
this
gosh, I
customer
remember
and
this.
this kid. I don't know how old the kid is. I hate this story because I'm the worst person in the world in this story. This kid answers the phone and I'm walking through the stuff with him, and I'm like, this is happening. We set it up. This has been 3 weeks, and he's like, I can't figure the thing out. And I'm like, I'm tearing into him. I'm yelling at him on the phone. Meanwhile, my work partner is a guy named Greg, is sitting across the little office space from me in this like 10 by 12 room. He's like as far back against the wall as you can get, eyes big, watching me like destroy this person on the phone because he can't help me finish this book I've written about relationships. Like I'm writing a book about relationship and conflict, and I'm annihilating this like 20-year-old kid on the phone because he can't figure out the machine. I'm like, gosh, who I am, who I am in what I do, who I am doing what I do. Like that actually is the art, and what I produce is an artifact. It's an expression of it. But the art is me. Like I'm the artist, and who I become is the actual thing. That's true in ministry. That's true in business. It's true in any facet of life. And what we miss with professionalism is we misidentify the word professional with productivity. But the professional is
Mm.
who becomes that person. So who you are as you do what you do is the ball game, and that's what makes you a professional.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth Gilbert talks about more Bugs Bunny, less Ernest Hemingway.
Yes, yes. I do
I
feel at
mean,
this point I'm more like Bugs than I do Ernest.
well, I mean, Hemingway didn't make it out alive. That's the reality.
Yeah,
So,
no, he
yikes.
didn't.
Yikes. I think it's interesting that this quote that you say that like Dan, the guy from Kansas City, looked at me and although I was doing my job well, he was paying attention to the person I was while I was doing it, and that actually mattered to him. I think it's interesting that like who you were was mattering to Dan, to Amy, and even I don't know if it mattered to like Matthew Perryman Jones, or was he, just like did he notice that, or was it because I think it's interesting that like once you would get into a room of a lot of people who are similar to you, it would be like, oh,
Yeah.
oh, like as soon as I talk to other producers or I talk to other people who are doing production, there's an easy metric real quick, but most of the time I'm operating in a vacuum, so I don't get that.
Yep. Yeah. Well, one, personal career stuff. I've never been, and you know this. Like I've never been like a chart topper of in any way, shape, or form. Like there are folks there, and this goes back to a story I told about Frank earlier in the book. Like the longevity and the consistency of my career in the arts and in ministry has never been because like I was on some roster and like in the top 10. It's literally always been because I've had personal connections with people who are like, I believe in you as a person. That's how my career started. Was Frank said, the music's not good, but I like you as a person. Like that's how the whole journey started. Is Frank said, these songs are bad, but I like you as a person. And that's actually been that's been the entirety of my career. I mean, it is a grace without question. It is a divine grace that threads together the whole of my career. Is that it's been about relationships, which means then when I'm in these places, there are people for and to whom I'm not primarily useful. Like they like what I do, but they could have invited anyone else in because there are lots of other people who are doing similar work who have bigger names and sell more books and sell more records. But my career has been woven together and held together like functionally by people who like me as a person and believe in me as a person, and they would choose and have chosen my work over someone else's work because we have a personal connection. So if I show up not okay, that actually matters to them. Story
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever told publicly. While I was on Young Life staff, while I was training for Young Life staff, I was at a thing called New Staff Training, which is responsible of Young Life to do. And um and you know this, Dan, like I've never been super attached to any of my jobs. Like my jobs are fine. Like I like the things I'm doing. I've never been like I'm a singer-songwriter for the whole of my life. So this story actually broadcasts forward from way back 1997, maybe 98. I'd have to look at the calendar. But I'm at this new staff training event thing in Florida, and part of the training is we head to urban Tampa, and we're visiting. We're hosted by this church, Black Gospel Church in Tampa. I'm one of like 8 white kids in the room at this gospel church, and I had never been at that point like in a like a religiously prophetic space where people like actually buy the notion of prophecy and will act on it. Like at that time, like the notion of prophecy was like it's like some dude that looks, like Rasputin, like predicting the future and
Classic.
saying like, well, in 1999 it will all end. Like that was prophecy for me. These people were there was this prophetic church and this prophetic moment. They actually like made room for the prophetic in their service, and I thought it was just the weirdest thing. And then this gentleman walked up to me that I had not met and puts his hand on my chest, covers like almost all my. He's a great big dude. Puts his hand on my chest and he says, "May I say something?" I said, "Like, yeah, like I'm here now." And he says, right to my face, he goes, "It'll never be about what you do. It'll always be about who you are." And I was like, "Thank you." And I didn't like at the time. I was like, "That's nice.
Yeah.
Thank you." As I look back, part of what we're getting at, and you just pointed at, is like, yeah, like I've never been. I hope folks hear this on the podcast and actually resonate, because it's been true of me, and I'm still here, like over 2 decades later. I've never topped a chart. I've never made the best record that year. I've never written the best book that year. I'm not the best presenter, speaker, person on anyone's roster. I'm actually not on anyone's roster anymore. And yet, like I'm 20 plus years into this, and the reason I'm 20 plus years into this is because I've developed relationships with people who like and value me as a person. So this person in this church in Tampa was like, hearing from the Lord at the time, it's going to be about who you are. The deeper I believe in that, the deeper and more functionally I believe that, the more that becomes my professional journey. Me becoming a more whole, a deeper, and a fuller version of myself, so that whatever I'm doing to the people who actually care about me, I'm giving a really good gift.
Yeah, that sounds it.
Amen and amen.
Amen.
Well, dude, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of the At Sea podcast. If you're digging this, and you should because it's great, check out the book. It's called Sacred Strides. And if you don't like that book, there's a book by a guy named Mark Buchanan. It's called
It will follow you
it's
around.
called The Rest of God.
It will follow you
Soul
home.
It's actually a great book. If for folks who are like who have tapped into the Sacred Sides thing and they're like, "What's my next step?" Well, there's a first step, and you've missed it. And it's a Canadian author named Mark Buchanan. The book is great. Check out Sacred Strides. You can. I would prefer, if I have a preference, order it from Byron Borger at heartsandmindsbooks.com. If you're an Amazon person, it is there. If you like Barnes & Noble, it's there. If you're looking for books in bulk of any of my books, actually, for Lent or beyond, you can reach out to me directly and I can set you up with better prices. Besides that, thanks for being here on the podcast, and until next time.